Thank you everyone for joining me today. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you all, and thank you to the Ag More Than Ever team for putting this together and being so supportive, and Noel, thank you for helping me get technologically up to standards around this. I appreciate that as well. Might as well get started. We live in a really interesting first world, and most of the population, even worldwide, globally, and especially here in North America, are generationally and geographically removed from the farm, as many as 2 to 4 generations removed from the farm. So there's a lot of people out there that seem to feel they're in a position, even though we're generationally and geographically removed from the farm, there's a lot of people out there that are feel entitled to advise or criticize farmers about the environmental and operational matters of the farm. We also live in this world where we are entranced by a misplaced rural nostalgia, one where eating local seems to be an only option, not just as a option, but the only option, where maybe we live in a place where wheat is viewed as being evil, or where large operations are referred to often as factory farms. And we also live in this world where if we feed our children processed foods, we're poisoning them. This is a crazy first world where there's a lot of misinformation out there, and unfortunately this causes problems for agriculture more broadly, and for all of us that work in this industry and love this industry. Agriculture has developed a bit of a public image problem. So what I'm talking to you about today is the art and science of the ag and food conversation. And I often get questions from people saying, well, what do I say? What do I say? The problem is that there is no one way. There's no prescription for having a conversation. And I'm a big fan of metaphors and symbols. That's a great part of the stuff that I research, how people perceive social representations in society. And so a metaphor that I like to use is this. An ag and food conversation is like a dance. And with every new partner that you go on the dance floor with, your steps might change a little bit, and you might have to adopt a new rhythm. So, and you might even have to learn a few new dance steps. So what I'm saying is that there's no cookie-cutter approach to this, but what I think we can do somehow, and maybe through just sharing some of my experiences and some of my ideas around this, we can move towards a way where each of us can participate in a conversation that is real and authentic to us, so that we can tell our ag and food story from a place that's authentic. So I'm just going to move on here. Here we go. So this world of misinformation is really complex. The conversational terrain out there is really broad and integrated. You can't talk about agriculture without talking about the environment. You can't talk about the environment without talking about health, and you can't talk about any of these things without talking about science. So when you sit down and have a conversation, all of these things seem to come in, and it makes things intimidating. And it can be difficult to even want to be motivated to engage in those kinds of conversations. But what I want to do is I want to start with some background about this. In order to move forward with our conversations, we need to understand the environment that we're operating in, and I think you guys are probably all quite aware of that. But the other thing is you need to understand how people think and what motivates them. And this is where my sociology background comes in. And I'm going to talk a bit about the human cognitive habits and how we humans think, all of us think. And that helps to give us insight into, when we're having conversations, where another person might be coming from. It creates kind of like a window into what's at the basis or may not clearly be visible in that conversational area. So we have a lot of issues, notwithstanding human cognitive conditions. We've got the urban-rural divide is a problem. We have a weird relationship with our food. I think we can kind of agree on that. We maybe once where our relationship with food was very functional, you know, decades ago. Now we live in a world where our standard of living is higher, and we can be a bit more discriminating about how and what we eat and how we feel about the food. We have issues around perceptions of expertise. There's all of the elements of how the celebrity can influence the messaging around food and agriculture. So there's a lot of complex issues that come into play here. And the big thing now that we're dealing with in this environment is social networks. And this is huge. It's fundamentally changed how we interact as human beings. We're online all the time. And most of us are on Facebook or we're using Twitter and so forth, and it's the new relational space. But also it becomes like the highway for misinformation as well. And I'll get into that in a bit of time here. So let's start with how we relate to food. We have in this first world, like I mentioned, more of an aesthetic relationship with our food. We have the luxury of not really worrying about where our next meal comes from, which is really great. But that's not how it is for everybody. And here's another thing. There's almost 1 billion people in the world that are fighting even to just get 300 calories a day. And that's the reality of things. The sad irony of all of this for us is that there are those of us in the first world that will line up and pay big bucks every month to inject ourselves with vitamins while willingly knocking down our caloric intake to an unhealthy 500 calories a day just to lose a few pounds. This is kind of the juxtaposition of social factors that kind of make up our global environment. And it's interesting to look at these things to get an understanding of how we view food. And the other thing that's interesting too is I almost think that healthy living in the first world has become almost a competitive sport. I'll leave that on that note and see what you think of that. Now, we have a first world identity food identity crisis. Like here's something interesting, and if you think about this, is a carrot or is a carrot a crudité? I mean, we apply words that are very visually stimulating or provocative to food in such ways that it can change how we view that food sometimes. The other thing that's interesting nowadays is that there's a whole level of consumerism and changing buying behaviors and what the consumer looks like and what motivates them. Today's consumers a lot different than it was maybe 50 years ago. We are increasingly racked with guilt, probably brought on by our aspirations to be good and responsible shoppers. With the indulgence that we do have in this first world, we sort of at a sociological level, feel guilty about it. So what we want to do is we want to purchase in a way that alleviates our guilt. So we've got a growing hunger for a new type of consumer products that are providing us a worry-free purchasing opportunity. And we don't want to worry about what the negative impact is of whatever we're consuming or eating. And at the same time, if we can fulfill this guilt-free consumerism approaches to buying, we also can continue to indulge in the way we want to indulge. We can continue to purchase the way we want to purchase. So it's estimated that there's about 2.5 billion guilt-ridden consumers in the world, and a third of the world, this is a third of the world that are defined by, number one, their love of shopping, and the other one, their desire for responsible consumerism. And this has fundamentally changed our buying patterns, if you think about it, because in this world, we buy more for what's not in the product, in the food product, than for what is actually in it. And that's a marked change from how we purchased a few decades ago. And then with all of this, we have quite a bit of doom and gloom. Again, words are very visual, and sometimes words come up that we don't necessarily know what they mean, or we might take a word that's used in another context and apply it in the food and egg industry, and it can kind of be maybe a bit scary or provocative. But the reality is that food, no matter how we look at it, is very highly political, it's inherently personal, and it's a really, really fundamental part of how we engage socially. Just like this week, if everybody's around for Easter, we're going to have family and friends over, we're going to be sharing a meal together, we're going to be visiting and so forth, or we might simply go down to the local pub and have wings and beer on Thursday night. So this is how we engage, this is how we talk to one another. Food and our consumption of food is a really important part of our social fabric. But we have a lot of people out there and a lot of organizations that kind of are changing the realities of what people perceive to be, or sorry, that are adjusting how people perceive what the realities of ag and food conversations are, what ag and food production actually is. And it's kind of doom and gloom and kind of negative. And I'm a glass half full kind of person, so I like to think positively. And if there are problems, you know, we move forward to try to solve those problems rather than focusing on the negative. And especially on negatives that really don't really represent the industry or how we farm in a real way. And all of these words are very powerful, and they are social, they can be visually provocative, like I said before, but they're very damaging to the agricultural industry. So it doesn't matter what part of the industry you're in. It doesn't matter if you're in poultry production, if you're organic or conventional and so forth. All of these things damage the broader agricultural industry, and it causes image problems, and it becomes all of our problems, no matter where those messages are coming from, no matter what they're directed toward. But there's good news too, and I think this gets forgotten, and again, the glass half full. Nowadays, it's significantly different how we consume and how we live. So we spend 40% less time in food preparation, 81% less time in cleanup, which to me is really good news, and we eat 25% more fruits and veggies than we ever have in the as far back as the 1970s. And we are living longer. These are all represent very important social changes in our life and how we consume and how we live. And there is lots of good news, and there's more good news coming along all the time, because agriculture and food production is highly innovative. There's lots going on, and Lyndon referred to that earlier. I won't expand upon that. But something that is very significant here that we can't forget, oh, sorry, this is one of my favorite quotes that I like to go back to. Jason Lusk, he's a colleague of mine, and he's an agricultural economist and author of The Food Police. And I recommend you read the book if you get a chance to. It's very good. But this is my favorite quote from him. The food that we so enjoy today is a feat of human ingenuity over nature's total indifference to us. Nature does not give a crap about us. Just does not. And you know what? That's why we have farming. That's why we have the value add and what we produce in such an environmentally and highly productive way nowadays. And we have to celebrate those things. And the fact is, we do need farming in order to overcome some of what nature wants to throw at us all the time. And bearing in mind all of this, we have a whole set of new stakeholders at the table. We have more than 500 activist organizations in North America that are spending upwards of $2.5 billion per year, and they are engaging and targeting conventional agriculture practice, biotech-related trade, obesity, labeling, testing, and other regulatory constraints. And this is happening every year. This is what a lot of my colleagues refer to as the fear industry. We don't really think of it as being an industry, but when you have these kind of dollars behind this, it is an industry, and it's significant, and we have to start looking at it that way, that this new market reality brings with it a whole new set of actors to the table, this means a new competitive landscape for all of us that work in agriculture. It doesn't matter if we're farmers, if we work for government, for the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, if we are grain handlers, it doesn't matter where we work in the value chain. All of a sudden, this matters significantly to us, and we have to be aware of it. And it also changes the content of our conversations, because with this money and with the activities that come out of this type of $2.5 billion a year investment is a lot of misinformation. So this is what we're faced with, and it's kind of tragic, but it also provides us with an opportunity to engage and to tell our stories in new ways. Now, I talked to you earlier about the different things, so I've provided a bit of context, which a lot of this probably doesn't surprise many of you. But what I also, there's a whole bunch of other things that come into play, and the most significant of these are human cognitive habits. It's interesting to understand how we think as human beings. because those filtering mechanisms for us play a huge role in how we interpret the the information that comes across our Twitter feeds or our Facebook feeds or in the conversations that we have with other people. So I like to talk a little bit about these human cognitive habits because they're really interesting. First of all, us human beings, all of us, are conspiratorial thinkers. There was a survey conducted last year in the U.S., and it found, among other things, that 29% believe aliens exist, and another 14% of people believe in Bigfoot. There are 7% of the respondents, 7 out of 100, believe that there are lizard people disguised as government people, or like bureaucrats, that are down here working in our governments and waiting to take over the world eventually. This is 7 out of 100 people. 7 out of 100. But there's a really good reason why we are conspiratorial thinkers. It's about survival over time. And the reality is that when we feel that there's something uncertain going on in society, we don't understand what's going on, what we want to do is we want to fill in the hole. So as soon as there is perceived to be gaps in information, then we will just fill in those holes with whatever story makes sense so that we can make sense out of something that defies sense-making in a way. A good, most recent example of this is the Malaysian flight. And for several weeks, and I don't even know where it stands now, but we didn't know what happened to that flight. And if you were looking on the media and you were looking on your Facebook feeds, you would see a whole bunch of conspiracy theories came up around it. It was really interesting, actually. So that's an interesting case study, but it shows what we do as human beings. If we don't understand what's going on, we try to fill it in with stories. Human beings are not logic processors. We're not fact processors. We are story processors. That's where we lean to first, and I'll get into a little bit more on that here. The other thing that we are is we're conformists. And once we glom onto a belief or an ideology, it's really difficult for us to be moved from that path. And our loyalties to ideologies surface through our own personal networks. And those networks are evolving now too, because at one time they would be people in our community, our family, our friends that are in the immediate area. But we're more of a global world now. We meet people all over the world. We connect with them on social media. So our networks have evolved as well. And all of those ideas that we glom onto, or ideologies, they are communicated and reinforced by the people that are around us. So that's pretty significant in all of this too. The other factor of the human condition is confirmation bias. So our human beings are always drawn to information that resonates with our personal worldviews. So if by chance we are given a factoid or a piece of information that somehow quite literally shakes the ground beneath the sacred cows that we hold so dear, we're more apt to ignore it and go on to the information that confirms our beliefs. This is what we do. And this is a very common process for us. The other thing is that we are pattern seekers, and we like to connect the dots anywhere from A to Z. That's how we work. And in fact, all animals do this, and it's about survival. It's about how we have continued to develop as a species over time. And this is referred to as associational learning, or patternicity. It's our tendency as human beings to find meaningful patterns in meaningless noise. And this is why we see things like the man in the moon, or if you look at a tree, the bark on a tree, you might see a face. This is our pattern-seeking capacities, and this is what we do. Now, an important part of patternicity is anecdotal association. So we hear anecdotes everywhere, very common in society, meaning that, for example, my cousin's diabetes was cured by taking this herb. Now, anecdotes are interesting, but they are not scientific evidence. But the problem in all of this is that science and its protocols and its methods are only a few centuries old. But anecdotes have been around since the dawn of man. And anecdotes are like little mini stories in and of themselves. And this is how we're more apt to kind of migrate towards an anecdote than we are towards facts or verified evidence or information. The other thing is too is that, and this is related to our as pattern seekers, we also like to think in pictures. And we do this as a way to visually process information. And especially if we're dealing with information that may be scary to us or so forth, we can create images in our mind. And we use parts of the brain that are both from the emotional centers, but also from the creative parts of our brain as well. And so unlike words that might go in one ear and out the other, pictures have a certain stick-to-itiveness in our brains. They just stick more. And they can be forever etched in there. And a really good example of this is the term frankenfood, which actually was introduced in a letter to the editor of the New York Times in 1991, frankenfood. And it's been used prolifically in a lot of anti-GMO narratives and so forth out there. And it's really visually provocative because you don't even have to put a picture with it, but the term frankenfood itself evokes something in our brain. It's kind of interesting, and we still see it out there all the time. Now, this is why and this is back to anecdotal thinking again, this is why as human beings we tend to want to believe the fanciful, or we don't want to think in terms of facts. We kind of have a more tendency towards magical thinking and how things work. And I guess this picture, I don't know, it seems to get a lot of laughs, but it's very interesting. We get on planes all the time, but we don't necessarily think about how they work. But we certainly trust that we're going to get from, say, Toronto to Saskatoon, or Vancouver to New York City. So this is kind of an interesting kind of visual on how we sort of think, and we forget that we don't think about this maybe a bit more rationally or logically, and so forth. Now, the other factor that we have in all of this is social media. And we're probably all aware of how great social media is. But here's the fact, going backwards a little bit, we've got an urban-rural divide, we've got weird relationship with foods, we have confusion about who the experts are, which I'm going to get into in a little bit, and we have all of this misinformation. And what's happening now is it's just being, all of these storylines, anecdotes, and misinformation are just kind of being shared on these fast-moving trains of Twitter, Facebook, and other social media platforms. And guess what? We're all tapped in. More than 70 of us in North America have mobile, some form of a mobile device that we have 24/7. And we've kind of evolved into what social scientists called citizen journalists. One time, if you were going to get anything published, you had to write a letter to the editor of a newspaper, or you had to be a journalist and accredited. But nowadays, anybody can write anything. They can get up on their soapboxes of Twitter, Facebook, and so forth, and just share their opinions, share their ideas, share photos, and reinterpret information any way that they want. And this is the driver of all that misinformation for us. So there's the beauty and the beast of social media, meaning that the beauty of it is we can connect up more, we have access to more information. The great thing I find is that I can keep in touch with friends and family, and it's just, you're right there, face to face. We can have webinars like we're having right now, which is really terrific. So we can connect in ways that we've never been able to connect before, but at the same time we're subject to more misinformation. And sometimes it's hard for consumers, for human beings, to understand what is accurate and what is inaccurate. Now, another thing to remember in all of this is the primary social media user demographic is the younger demographic, which is 21 to 35 years of age. But there's a growth demographic out there, 45 years and plus, and a lot of them are motivated because they're grandparents. They're becoming grandparents, or their children are away, so they want to be able to connect with them in a meaningful way. And social media does that. But again, we're back to this whole thing where we have just-in-time misinformation as well. So that's the drawbacks of social media, and I think that that's what's really driving a lot of the challenges that we're facing in this industry right now. The other thing, a part of all of this too, is that where activism at one point meant that you were going out into the street and you're holding up a picketing sign and so forth, we're not doing that anymore. We're actually clicking. So we call them clickavists now. They're not activists so much. You can just push a button on your computer and you can become an activist. So identifying as an activist has never been easier or less costly than it has been before, which is really interesting as well. Now, celebrity influence. Who doesn't love to hear about Dr. Oz? He's so interesting. But what's happened, use of celebrities as endorsers is not an uncommon business practice. We've used it forever. It's a strategy where a firm might select an endorser and match it, so someone with likable qualities or with qualities that are salient to them, and match it with a brand or a product that they want to promote. This is not uncommon. This has been happening forever. We see it with sports, sports figures and, like Nike, so forth. We've been doing this for a long time. And, but the thing is that mass media, television and all the rest, social media platforms and so forth, have brought celebrities into our homes in ways unlike ever before. So we have a closer, more intimate relationship with the celebrities. We turn on our televisions every afternoon and we can watch Oprah and Dr. Oz, and they're there. And they have become a part of that personal broadening network that we have. We see them as our friends. We see them as our allies in all of this. And this more intimate connection that we have with celebrity also represents the fact that what we want to do as consumers is we want to buy into what we perceive as their wonderful lifestyle or into their belief patterns, because we see them as having some form of a good life and we want to tap into it. But the reality is that a lot of these individuals, these celebrities, they're not subject matter experts in these things, but they have a lot of influence in how their audiences, which Dr. Oz's audience is 4 million viewers a day and growing, they have a lot of influence in how their audience will perceive things, like agriculture and food production. So when there is a myth moving forward, and there's a celebrity pushing that myth forward in some way, that myth and misinformation can gain a lot of ground in terms of public perception. So I don't have to tell you probably all of this because you've seen it. The other factor in all of this that's really interesting is and it's part of our human condition, is our tendency to overvalue or overstate our own knowledge on topics. So I've got a graph up here. The Dunning-Kruger effect was first formally introduced in the 1990s, and these were a couple of psychologists out of Cornell University down in the States. And the title of the study says it all: Unskilled and Unaware of It, How Difficulty in Recognizing One's Own Incompetence Leads to Inflated Self-Assessments. Note the x-axis here, which we have a scale of knowledge, meaning those that are less knowledgeable are on the left, and those with more knowledge are on the right. And the important bits here are the differences. So if you look at the arrows right there, the red arrows that I have on either side of the graph, the important bits here are the differences between the predicted ability and test scores, so the red and blue lines, and actual test scores, the green line. You'll notice that those with less knowledge grossly overestimate their level of competence and expertise, and meaning that they perform considerably lower in terms of test scores on their tests, while those that are the experts sometimes underestimate their own true level of expertise. So this is another part of the human cognitive paradigm, or our habits, that kind of pulls into all of this as well, is our overstatement of what our knowledge is on a given topic. On an interesting side note, this particular study was inspired by a very interesting social event. There was a gentleman, and I don't remember which town it was down in the States, but he decided he was going to rob a bank, and he was told by someone in his network that if he rubbed lemon juice all over his face, that the cameras in the bank would not be able to recognize his face. Well, he was very surprised when the police caught up with him, and this was reported in the media, of course, and then probably went all the way across the country, because this would be a very interesting story. But Dunning and Kruger decided that they thought this was so interesting, the perceptions, this gentleman and his thinking and his beliefs, and how that really didn't work in his favor, it would be interesting to go on and conduct a study. So that's where that came out of. So if you get a chance to actually look up Dunning-Kruger, and the whole lemon juice affair. It's quite funny, quite interesting. Here's something that's been it's been widely publicized, and we've talked about it in agriculture quite a bit. We have a bunch of marketing strategies that have come out of late, and that are compounding problems around perceptions of ag. And these marketing tactics are designed to build brand equity for retail products, but at the same time, they're throwing certain parts of the industry and some conventional practices under the bus. It's too bad. The strategies are designed to manufacture doubt in the minds of the consumer, and they're also designed to brand a product, right? And they've probably been quite successful in doing so. But what it does is it alters the reality of the consumer and what they see and how they see. And if we go back and remember our guilt-ridden consumer, wow. They're making the consumer feel guilty, and they're drawing the consumer into using their products so that, you know, they understand the consumer very well and what will motivate them to buy in a certain way. So, and sadly it works. What we've created out of all of these marketing campaigns is a preferred reality that these companies want the consumers to see so that they'll buy their own products. So this is a problem for all of us. There's a whole bunch of factors here that I've kind of outlined that kind of give you an impression of the environment that we're operating in. But what can we do? How can we deal with all of this amidst all of this noise? It's such a complex set of problems all thrown into one, and we don't often know what to do. And this is why we have to have the conversations. Conversations are grassroots, and this is where we can really, really, really make some changes. And it's not easy. Having a conversation is not always easy, but it's something that we have to work towards, and we have to make efforts in. And I'm going to give you some ideas on some of the things that I've dealt with and some of my experiences, just to give you an impression of how things can go, but that this is doable, and it's not always scary. And sometimes you end up making and meeting new friends and colleagues in the process. So it's a good thing. So lessons learned. I say lesson number 98 here. Seriously, I could have put any number in there. I have learned thousands of lessons in this. This has been a long process for me. I probably tentatively stepped out of the ivory tower about 4 years ago and started engaging in dialogues and discussions around science and agriculture and food production. And it wasn't easy for me. It was very tentative at first. And then I got to the point where I maybe got a bit soapboxy, so I maybe got on my soapbox a little bit, and that doesn't work at all either. So there has to be a certain sense of being humble and recognizing your own limitations and your own limitations in terms of your expertise when you're engaging in these conversations. And there's nothing wrong with that. One of those things is there's nothing wrong with saying you don't know something. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying, look, I don't know that, but I'm willing to find out for you. It's a gift. So ag and food conversations can be uplifting, fulfilling, entertaining, and humorous, but they can also be difficult and frustrating. And I bet you all of you have had an experience like this. Conversations can get ugly. And some of the most uncomfortable conversations I've had have been ones with family and friends. And I think when the personal comes into play, the dynamics change a little bit. Lines aren't very clear in that personal space. You can't make those lines as clear, and things can get tough, and that's where I've made mistakes a lot of times. And for example, this one, my cousin Carol, she sent me a chain email, and there was a whole bunch of misinformation in it, and I thought, well, do I leave it or what do I do? And I thought, nope. I responded to her email, long-winded, line after line after line, debunking all of this misinformation. And I really thought I was providing her with some valuable insights. I thought I was, going, hey, I've got this knowledge, so I'm going to share it. I probably came off like a bit of a show-it-all. So soapboxing doesn't work, generally, in my experience anyway. And I find that it doesn't fit with my personality really either. And that's another, we'll get into being authentic later. But Carol's response to all of this was absolutely nothing. She didn't even respond to my email, and then I noticed after that that she didn't have me even on her email list anymore. So then that's okay, right? That's fine. We still, Carol and I love each other. We respect each other, but you know, there's certain things that I probably maybe created a dividing line in our relationship where I didn't have to. So that was one of the experiences I've had. Other experiences have been, I've got a lot of urbanite friends and very smart women who are entrepreneurs and so forth, and we get together to have wine and we bring appetizers. This is a very common thing. I think women do this all the time. And I got up on my soapbox again with this group, and I think I pretty much shut the party down one time. And I'm telling you this to be contrite because that's what I did. It was a mistake on my part. And it was too bad. I mean, I probably had 2 glasses of wine, which I don't dialogue about food and egg and then drink wine at the same time. It's probably not such a good idea. But these are some of the lessons that I've learned. And especially that whole soapbox thing. We have to step away from that soapbox. No matter what our expertise is, we have to make sure that who we have a conversation with, who we're doing our dance with at that very moment, that we are on common ground with them, that we are relating one-on-one. And because you know what, you can't dance together if you're not in rhythm with one another. There's my metaphor again. So what I say and what I have learned is how you communicate is more important than what you actually say. It doesn't become about the facts or the information or the evidence. It's how you relate to other people. And that's where the art of the conversation comes in. And this takes some practice, especially when we're so passionate about agriculture and we want them to understand, well, no, actually the pesticides that we use now are really a lot safer than they have been in the past, or, you know, information like that. We need to be able to relate to people on a human-to-human level first before we start introducing facts or information like that. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more. Some of the tools that I like to use, which are very useful, and never underestimate the power of the visual, because remember, humans think in pictures. And this is one that I often use, and this is inspired by one of my Twitter friends, is that conventional plant breeding is like a mosh pit, whereas genetic engineering is like a ballet. And there's not one that's any better or worse than the other. They're just different. They're different approaches. And what this does visually is it shows that ballet is maybe more precise than the mosh pit of conventional plant breeding. This is another one that I think is a really good visual, and it talks about hormone levels and different things. And it was actually pure genius. This is from Joan Ruskamp out of Nebraska. And she shows what the different, she does a comparative using M&Ms. I assume they're not Smarties because there's no Smarties down in the States, but M&Ms here where she shows the different levels of hormones and different things, anywhere from, we've got beef most importantly, but even cabbage, so that we can try and create those visual cues for consumers so that they can better understand the information that we put in front of them. Now, the dreaded conversation. This is always interesting. And like I said before, there is no cookie cutter approach to any of this. But what we have to remember is that human-to-human contact is really important. And there are lots of people out there with lots of perspectives, and they run along the continuum. And we need to get beyond our own biases, because we're all humans and we all have biases, and we need to step outside of our own natural ways of thinking and seeing things to engage with everybody else. And we can't make assumptions, and that's the biggest thing. We can't make assumptions about people regarding their knowledge, and we certainly can't undermine what maybe their fears are. And I like to think of people, all of us, sitting along like a continuum, meaning that this is based on knowledge, understanding, and expertise. It's based on political motivators, on emotional factors, and anybody can be from all out angry or hanging off the fringe to just being plain curious. And we have to figure out where people sit on this continuum once we're starting to engage in the conversation, because you never know what you're going to get in the conversation. And like I said, no cookie cutter approach. And so you need to be, as an individual, when you're going into these conversations, you need to be really well grounded and know yourself, know who you are, and be authentic in terms of conveying your, number one, your expertise, or where the limits of that expertise is, and about what you know and your knowledge, but also just about what makes you tick. Like, are you an artist? Are you a family person? Do you have grandchildren? Are you caring for a loved one who's sick or dying? I mean, all of these things make up who you are as the individual, and they play a role in how you have that conversation and you make that human-to-human contact. We can't undervalue or underestimate those things at all. So the strategy. This is how I kind of go about things. I mean, and it's interesting because I was trying to figure out how do I do this, because it's taken me a long time. And I'll tell you, I'm never always feeling comfortable going into the conversation, but it just takes a lot of practice. It's almost like the conversation is the process of the conversation is almost like an exercise, right? So you have to build up those muscles, the conversational muscles. And the strategy that I come around, because we've got people with different perspectives across the continuum, is number one, I like to determine. And this gets easier more and more you engage in a conversation, whether it's face-to-face or it's online. You can pretty much figure out where they are on the continuum after you've kind of done these conversations. So you have to determine very early where this person is, because in order to diffuse and deflect, which is the next step, you have to understand who you are talking to and what matters to them. And sometimes you have to be quick about it, because they'll quit, depending on who they are and where they are in the continuum, they could take that conversation and derail it very quickly. So when you move into the next step, which is diffuse and deflection, you want to find out, is it anger, is it fear, what's the emotion that's at work, what are the political motivators that are driving this? And you have to, when you're going into this process, so you have to use your own personal experience, your own personal story to kind of filter through some of this stuff. And that can be a little difficult. For example, I was giving a talk. It was a public talk, so we had everybody in the audience. And I had a very passionate chap come up to me at the end of my talk, and he pretty much was close talking, like right here, and he had his finger wagging in front of me, and I'm like, and I'm so readable, so I don't know. Anyway, I was taken aback, and I wasn't quite sure how to deal with that, so that whole process of determine was really hard, and I had to think quickly on my feet. And I said to him, and I had a whole lineup of other people that were wanting to chat with me as well, probably a little less passionate than this guy. What I did was I looked at him in the eye and I said, you know what, you seem very passionate about what you're talking about, and I really want to spend some quality time with you, but how about I talk to these people first, you go have a seat, and I'll come over and talk to you later, and we can spend some time around this. So I've accomplished a few things doing this. I took charge in a polite, respectful way, and that's really important, polite, be respectful. I acknowledged and validated that person's fears and anger. I did. I made others that were watching all of this more comfortable, and but at the same time, I also prioritized them, because that's what we have to do. It's that middle ground 80% that we really have to be talking to. And even if we're talking to someone that's hanging off the conversational edge, we have to, whether they're in the room or not, we have to conduct that conversation or that exchange as if those people are watching. That's what matters. They need to see that you respect the conversational space, no matter what's coming at you. The other thing that I also did by doing this with this gentleman is I provided a timeout for me, because I needed one, and I provided a timeout for him. And the interesting part of all of this is by the time I chatted with the folks in line, and then I went and sat down with this guy, he had diffused too. So we both had a fairly good conversation. Did we agree on everything? Absolutely not. But that was okay. We had a respectful conversation. We exchanged business cards. He didn't send me anything at Christmas, but you know what? I wasn't really expecting anything anyway. But it was good. At the end of the day, you want to have handled things with dignity. That's what matters most. The big thing in all of this is that it is not personal. even though agriculture, what we do and how passionate we are about agriculture, it's not personal. And even though they come at you and attack you in a personal way, you have to kind of step back from that, because it's important that we be passionate about what we love and what we do. But we have to be careful about the emotion, because that can get us into trouble in conversation. So we have to step away from that and remember that agriculture, even though we farm and it's part of our blood, if our families run the farm, it's still a business, and we have to treat it like that, and we have to protect our conversations in such a way that we honor that in those ways too. So the whole decide thing, the determine, the diffuse, and the decide and deflect, and all of those first three steps honestly can come at you, and they can be crammed into about a minute, and you got to deal with it. So that only comes, that's like exercising that conversational muscle. So you have to kind of get in there, and you have to just practice and keep conversing. And you know what? Doing some role playing with friends doesn't hurt. So you could try that as well. Then at the crux of all of this, especially when you're diffusing and deflecting and you're having that conversation, ask questions. The only way to really determine where someone is at, and where they fit along that continuum, so you can figure out where this conversation is going, is you have to ask questions about them. Find out, oh, well, what do you do for a living? Oh, you're a nurse? Oh, okay. Find out things. Oh, you're a mother. Or, just dig inside their head a little bit. And it's, I guess probably we're bestowed with 2 ears and 1 tongue for one reason, meaning that we should listen more and talk less. And this is a good reason to do it, so you can figure out what's going on or what will go on in that conversation. Then you move into dialogue. And those dialogues are different every time. And again, back to cookie cutter. Is there a cookie cutter approach? No, there isn't. There is an art and science to this whole process. And sometimes your online dialogues are a lot different than your face-to-face. So it changes all the time. I think something to remember with the nuances of dialogue is that you have to always connect, meaning that you have to find common ground, and that's where the questions come in. If you're going to ask a question, oh, well, where are you from? And, oh, you're from there? Well, I'm just down the road so far. Oh, do your kids play hockey? Yeah, my kids play hockey too. And we have to remember that there's always common ground. Even if we are divided on a certain topic or issue, there is always common ground between people, and you have to dig around and find that out. That is the first most important thing that we have to do in our conversation. And in remembering this conversation and how it's carried out is that it is relationship building. It is not about getting a conversion. So when you're going into these conversations, your conversational win is about human-to-human contact. It's not about winning the argument. And again, we have to listen more, talk less. We have to initiate and ask questions. Those are really important factors. Those have really worked for me anyway. And again, we shouldn't stop there. We should make efforts to reconnect, because the value should be in the relationship more than the actual conversational content, in my opinion. So if you have a conversation online with someone that you've never met before in real life, but you're having a conversation, and something pops up on your radar, your informational radar, like even 2 weeks later, and you remember, oh, I remember Sally, I talked to her on Twitter, and she was really interested in this topic. Go back and share that information. Because the reality is that people are going to respond to the fact that you remembered them more than they're going to even remember what you said or did. That effort to value the relationship really goes a long way in our conversations, no matter what we're conversing about. Now, sources is another issue. A lot of people say, oh my gosh, there's so much information out there, and we want to have reliable, independent information when it comes to kind of answering or digging through some of the, the nuances of the science or agricultural processes and so forth. We want to, I think one of the most important things that I ever did very early on is when I was going into Twitter especially, and I was kind of engaging in there, is I figured out very soon who's in the know, who has the expertise in different areas. And then I built my networks around that. So right now, and it happens to me all the time, nobody knows everything. So when you're faced with a question that you don't know, it's so great if you have somebody out there that does know, and you can ask them. So your networks are really important sources of information for you. And every day there's a growing critical mass of people engaging in these dialogues. And I mean scientists from different areas, bench scientists, government scientists. There's also farmers, and you guys farmers are probably the most important sources of information. I love it that I have a whole bunch of farmers that I can go to, whether they're organic farmers or conventional farmers, because remember, I'm not a farmer, so I don't have all that information. So if I have a question, someone comes at me for a question for information, and I go, well, you know what, I don't really know, but I will find out for you. Then I have all these resources that I connect with and that I can go to. And then what you do is you tool up over time. You create your own inventory of resources, whether you're using your stories or other people's stories, because other people's stories are really good too. You can use those visual and other online tools. There's memes out there. And the other thing is you can participate in discussion forums. There's a whole bunch of opportunities out there that allow you access to information. And pretty soon you're able to discern what's the good stuff and what's the garbage, I guess. That's better than another one I was thinking about. So the art and science and the science of art of the conversation. The goal in our conversations should not be to change hearts and minds of people. It's not about conversion. What it should be about is changing their point of reference. If they're going to these sources for their information and you know it's not the right one, then your goal should be more about having that conversation, building trust, and ensuring that if they don't come to you for information, that maybe they're kind of being more selective about where they go, or at least they're rethinking the information sources that they're currently after. That's what matters in all of this, most of all. And the other thing is, and I cannot emphasize this enough, really go easy on yourself. Sometimes it's okay to walk away. My daughter, this is her adage, she says some conversations and some boyfriends have expiring dates. And so if you don't allow yourself that latitude of walking away from a really, really, really uncomfortable situation and just accept that things didn't go the way that you would have liked to, you're less likely to engage in another conversation like it. So you have to cut yourself some slack, really. And because we want you to engage. That's what we're trying to encourage. So it's okay to walk away sometimes. That's what I say anyway. The other thing is this is my son Hayden, and some of the most important conversations we will ever have are those with our children, our grandchildren, our nieces, our nephews, and our young people. These are the people that are going to be leading the world in the future. And because most of us are generationally and geographically removed from the farm, 2 to 4 generations, with each successive generation, that divide gets bigger and bigger. So if we don't start talking about agriculture and food production in our own homes and start getting these conversations going in our own personal networks and spaces, we're missing out on huge opportunities here, because there's a lot of opportunities to be built in that 10 million calories and those 2 hollow legs of my son that you have to have those conversations with them. They have to understand things, or at least learn, and at the very least, learn to think critically, because we are living in an information-rich age, and at the very least, our young people have to have the tools to understand and to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff in all of this. That's what's really important, I think, as well. So we need to start off in our own homes. So I'm going to leave you with some final thoughts. Make real connections and avoid educating. And again, this requires more listening than talking. If you hit the conversational wall, back up the bus. That's okay. Like, go, okay, I'm sorry. Let's move back and let's start this again. And if you can't respect the argument, at least respect the intent behind it. People are passionate, and they have, even if you don't understand or understand why they're afraid, it doesn't mean that that fear can't be validated in some way, and they can't connect to that in some way, because people's fears to them are real. They matter. And if you ensure that you communicate that they matter to you too, then you're connecting to them on that human-to-human level. And be brave and be confident, because you often know more than you think that you do. And again, like I said before, it's okay to say you don't know. It's even better to say I don't know, but I will find out for you, and you reconnect with them. And again, crowdsource, use your network. If you're in a conversational space online and you got people picking on you, call on your networks to come in and give you a hand. I've done that many times. It works really well, and there's always someone willing to come in and help you, more than one usually. The important thing is, in all of these conversations, is that we have to lead with the narrative. Lead with the narrative, leave the facts till later. Connect. Human-to-human connection, most important thing. Remember, people are not logic processors, they are story processors. They want the story. And that's where you come in, and you being authentic. And improving your position doesn't necessarily mean raising your voice. And I learned that the hard way a couple times too, but this is how we evolve, this is how we get better at what we do. But it does mean finding your voice. And that means claiming some conversational space that makes sense to you. It can be around a bonfire, it can be in the local hockey arena, it can be at a church social, it can be at a benefit, it can be online, it can be on Twitter, it can be anywhere that you're comfortable. If you want to build a blog, that's fantastic. Blogs are great because I want to know what you're doing on your farm, if that's what your area of expertise is. These are the spaces you have to find, and it has to have meaning to you. It has to have value add for you. Otherwise, you're not going to engage in an authentic way. So we have to be really accurate with the information we provide, and we have to be accountable, meaning that we have to step back and say, uh-oh, you know what, I gave you the wrong information. Let me reinvestigate that and come back at you. But most importantly, we have to be authentic in our approaches. What we should do is we should lead with our authentic selves, with our stories, with our narratives, and at the very least, what we walk away with it is a new friendship and maybe a lot of respect for one another. That's the main thing. Because I think, and I love this quote from Maya Angelou, people will forget what you said and did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. That is the most important thing. And that's why that human-to-human connection in our conversations matters so much, and why coming from a value-based perspective and a storytelling perspective matters. Because our conversations are relationship-building exercises. And starting with the story matters most, because that's how we want to connect with people. And you know, if you're nervous about whether you're doing it right or not doing it right, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because we all have different voices. We're going to claim that conversational space in many, many different ways. And it's really the collective interplay of all our voices together that really will serve as a change agent for what's going on out there in our agricultural environment. I hope I've inspired you today. It was really interesting to talk to you in this format. I kept forgetting to look at the camera, but anyway. Anyway, that's great. I'm done, and I'm open to questions. Let me see here. I got to go back up to the top, don't I? There's a few here. Bear with me here. What? Okay, I got a question here. Let me read this from Jeanette. I see more and more divisiveness amongst the agricultural community. Farmers speaking out against farmers on a range of topics like GMOs and biosolids and large multinational ag companies. What can those who work in the industry do to get farmers having conversations that will move the industry forward rather than always locking horns? Great question, Jeanette. This is something that I probably didn't explicitly bring up in my presentation, but this is a huge thing. There is divisiveness in the agricultural industry, whether it's between subsectors or, you know, like you say, GMOs, you know, and maybe conventional versus organic and so forth. And the reality is, if there's no motivation other than trying to deal with the $2.5 billion that are going into the fear industry, we have to start working together, and that's really hard. So maybe the conversations that we need to prioritize right now are the ones within ag, not so much people, you know, working in ag and people outside. Maybe, well, we have to do all of those things, but maybe this is something we need to focus on as well, because we need to start thinking as a community, as a broader community, as a broader industry of working together. Because as soon as we start becoming divisive in our approaches, if we start infighting, then that just provides those spaces. Remember I talked about those informational gaps, and that people start filling in, and sometimes the people who know the very least or are providing misinformation are filling in those gaps. So all of our divisiveness in the industry, all of that serves to do is it creates more environments for some of these individuals or organizations to go in and fill in with misinformation. So our tactics need to be more cohesive within the overall broader ag and food production industry. We need to start speaking as one voice in a way, but we're all different, we all operate differently, but we need to also start working together on some in resolving some of these issues. Oh, good. I'm just learning to use all of this. Okay, we've got Jeanette. From Albert, Cami, how do we engage our young farmers to help us deliver our message of producing our food? You know what? I can't remember what the number was. Is there an average age of the average age of a Canadian farmer right now? Is it like 50 plus or something? And if someone knows, just fire it out there on the questions thing. I don't know. But what we have is we have a bunch of 54, 55. Thank you, Arden. What we have is we have the part of the misinformation out there is everybody's talking about these corporate farms. When in reality, what we have is we have generations of families working together on one farm. And of course they become incorporated because that's just good business practice. So what we have is we have, you know, dad or grandpa or mom or grandma working together with some of the younger generations to, you know, to work on the farm. Because, you know, farming is a great lifestyle, so a lot of people don't want to retire from it, so they stay on it and with it forever, right? It's nothing wrong with that. But the thing is that what our young farmers can do that may be better than us older people who are a little longer in the tooth and aren't so tech savvy, maybe it's the young people in the family that are part of the farming operation can actually get online. They're the ones that actually can start blogging and engaging in some of those spaces that maybe those of us that are older are less comfortable, you know, participating or operating in. And I have, Gabrielle said, in the Aboriginal communities, 47% of farmers are under 25 years old. Wow, didn't know that. Cool. Anyway, I think that's where some of the younger people can come into play, because we've got, it's not only just Twitter and Facebook, we've got potentials for blogging to tell our stories. There's Instagram. Hey, I just finally joined Instagram like about 2 weeks ago, so this is even new for me. But sharing pictures, I mean, those are all great things because, again, we're visual thinkers. So if we can put pictures out about how we farm and how we operate from day to day, that's always fantastic. We can sharing that kind of information in that format is great. And I often find that the younger demographic is a little bit more open to trying out new technologies than maybe the older ones are. So maybe that's how we can take advantage of that age group and maybe their burgeoning expertise around those things. Population, not farmers, sorry. Okay, in Aboriginal communities, 47% of the population are under 25 years old. Okay, thank you, Gabrielle. Okay, sorry, I misinterpreted that. Do we have any more questions? Oh, I got one here. Okay, Carly. Do you have suggestions for groups who are attempting to start these sort of ag immersion programs regarding funding? Which groups to target for joint involvement? Wow. So are you talking about like on-farm tours, Carly, or what do you mean? Or just about education programs? Oh, okay, yeah. Well, do I have any ideas? Well, probably nothing that I could collectively put in my head right now, but I think that one advantage that we have right now is we have some really good examples of things that are going really well, like the Farm and Food Care program in Ontario is fantastic. I mean, they're doing some really, really innovative things. And my argument always is that there's no shortage of resources out there, no shortage of information, but it might be hard to find the information. But the great advantage that we have as an industry is that we have some examples out there that we can replicate. We don't have to reinvent the wheel if we don't want. So if we can start, taking something like food and farm care and making it a national program in some way and applying it in each province, wouldn't that be fantastic? The other thing that I had an idea about, this is just I ideas coming all the time, but anyway, this is one that I thought was really good, is that I find that there's a lot of really good farming and ranching bloggers down in the States. And part of it, I'm not saying that we're not doing it up here, we're just starting to do it up here in Canada. But I'm wondering if we can't build some sort of mentorship program between those individuals that are doing that kind of work down there with some of us that want to start blogging up here or doing that kind of work up here, because I think there's much to be learned. And again, not by reinventing the wheel, but just by learning how something's done and trying to replicate it in a way that makes sense for us. So that's another option as well. Oh, I missed something here. Oops. Okay. Bear with me here. Okay, I have a question from Guy, and it's in French. I'm sorry, I don't know. Can somebody, that will be translated shortly. Thank you, Amy. Sorry, I'll move on to Rob. Is there a grassroots farm gate opportunity for hosting on-farm tours for urbanites through the growing season? Any examples? Well, Rob, there's that. I think that the food and farm care program in Ontario launched, and I don't know if they had more than one, but they had a breakfast on the farm program, and it was really successful. I think they brought something like, and please anybody jump in and correct me if I've got my facts wrong here, but I think they brought in 2,000 people from the city, and they fed them breakfast, and they had an opportunity to tour around the farm. It was a really, really good example. And these are kind of things that I think we need to continue to do. And that's huge. I find that people, when they actually, and this is again another human factor, it's that whole tactile thing. If we can actually see, feel, touch things, we all of a sudden have a different relationship with things. We can't sit back and criticize it in the same way because we have a better understanding that relates to our humanness. And so these opportunities of going on the farm, and I don't know if they have different rules in different jurisdictions in different provinces around how you can actually coordinate those things, because I think there might be some biosecurity issues or so forth. But I think that this is something we really need to look at more in depth, Rob. I think that this is something that we need to do more of, because if we keep considering that with each generation, each new generation, they're getting further and further removed from the farm, we need to provide opportunities for those people to actually see how farms operate. Okay, where are we? Oh boy, I gotta scroll back up here because I can't necessarily see them. Oh, what did Amy says? The UPA in Quebec also hosts an open house on various farms on certain days. Oh, interesting. Didn't know that. Open Farm Day is here in Nova Scotia too. Our Federation of Agriculture. Oops. Oh, our Federation. Sorry, I missed that. Our Federation of Agriculture also hosts meetyourfarmer.ca. That's neat. So I'm going to move down a little bit here. This is hard to read because every time someone puts it in, it pops up, puts a question in. In Niagara, we're having dinner at the dairy in July. Insurance is costly. There's another thing I thought about. Cami, oops, now I missed that again. If we could change the question box someday in these webinar things, it would be easier. It's hard to kind of keep track. Allison says, Cami, I think we still need to promote education on agriculture at the elementary and high school levels in the classroom. There are so many young people who don't understand where food comes from. I think promoting education, encouraging interest in the schools will definitely get more young people entering the industry and promote a more positive perception on agriculture also. Your thoughts? Absolutely. Absolutely. Ag in the classroom is a really good example of this. Do we need to do more? Yes, of course. We live in a country where agriculture is a major part of our economy, and it's not really on our curriculum. And we need to put more efforts into this. But here's another thing that I would say we need to put more emphasis on too. And I didn't talk about it explicitly in my talk today, but it's points of influence, teachers. A friend of mine from Okotoks, she sent me a message the other day, and she said to me, she said, this is the message that my daughter, my daughter who's in grade 8, got from her teacher. Do not drink milk, it's full of hormones and poison. And I went, what? So it's not just targeting the students, but we also have to target those points of influence. They matter too. And does that mean going into professional development days and giving seminars, or just connecting with teachers overall? Because even if they're not including agriculture in the curriculum, it's probably really important that they have some sense of, they have points of reference to go to that are fact-based rather than, filled with fallacies and misinformation as well. So we have to, it has to be, I think, a two-tiered approach to things. So not only targeting the students, absolutely, but we also have to target the teachers as well. Okay, now I'm going back up again. Tamara Davison Orchards in Vernon, BC offers farm tours every day in July and August and weekends in the spring and fall. It's a great way to see fruit and vegetables growing. See, there you go. There's an individual effort that I think is really value add. And Laurie Williamson suggests learn a bit more about Ag for Life mandate to deliver ag education to students. There's a link there for all of us to use, which is really great. Okay. Oh, thank you for drawing my attention to ones further up. Okay, I got a question from Arden. I'm a bit of a data junkie, me too, and I'm concerned my colleagues and I aren't effective communicating our data to a broad audience. Do you have some tips on how we can communicate what the data says without data overload? You know what? I like data, mostly, I guess, because I'm an academic and it's such a driving force of when I research, we have to have data. That's kind of the way it goes. So it was a love-hate relationship at one time, and now I love it. So it's whatever, an evolution of a relationship. But what I find the best way to do is when you can match the data with something visual. And it was sort of like the example where I showed you the Dunning-Kruger data. That's a really good way to show the differences. And I could have even done that differently and made it more visually understandable to a lay audience. But I think when you match, you take the data, and without misrepresenting the results of the data, you actually translate it into a manner that people can relate to, that's relatable. And I always get into trouble with my science colleagues because I say, you know what, you got to translate your knowledge into a way that people can understand, because you're doing lots of good stuff, but you're not good at translating. And that's where science has to step up huge. I mean, farmers, you farmers you're doing such great things, and I think what we can do is we can learn from that, from the scientific community, and we need to step out a little bit more and communicate better. I'm up to 5 minutes. I'm down to 5 minutes. Can you answer this question? Okay, where are we at? Tamara from Davison Orchard, she says they're also hosting an ag awareness event September 13th and 14th. Well, that's pretty exciting. These efforts are really good, and we have to start sharing them in our community, and I'm assuming that Ag More Than Ever kind of puts these out so we're aware of what's going on, so we can celebrate the farmer, as Tamara says. Alberta has a classroom agriculture program. They sometimes struggle to find volunteers to come into classrooms to talk about ag. And I think we as ag advocates need to see what programs are available now and see what we can do for them. Exactly. Because we're always looking for new spokespeople. And that's not everybody's bag either. Not everybody wants to be a spokesperson. But if you have, if you have a soft spot in your heart for going out and talking to kids, then you should take that opportunity and share your knowledge in that way. Let's see. Here's the question that was translated from Dee. This is from Dee. Thank you, very interesting. For me, agriculture is not valued enough. The pleasure of the earth and the food almost doesn't exist. Do you think visits to the farm should be made a mandatory part of preschool? Well, why not? Wouldn't that be terrific? I mean, we eat 3 times a day. We should really understand where our food is coming from. And if you think about it, and you think about education and life education, isn't that a fundamental? I think it is. I think we're probably winding down. Is Lyndon coming back on? Just you. Okay, no. Thank you. I think we're almost done. See, what I see happening in the questions box is that people are starting to talk back and forth between each other and share information, and I think that this is really valuable too. I think we need to talk amongst ourselves, talk to each other. We need to talk within our families and with our tighter networks, our family and friend networks, but we also need to talk to people outside. And we also have to think outside the box in how we talk to people. Priority number 1 is the human-to-human connection. And you can define that in any way that makes good sense for you as an individual, because at the core of all of this, you cannot have a good conversation with someone without it coming from an authentic space. That's what matters most in all of this. Thank you so much for letting me talk to you today. It was a really interesting forum for me to talk on. I am available. I'm going to put my email up here, and if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. We could talk more.